Imagine stepping onto a first-class flight, expecting comfort, respect, and the luxury you paid for, only to be treated like you don't belong. Imagine being watched, judged, tested, as if you were an intruder in a space that was never meant for you. That's exactly what happened to Xavier Caldwell, Monica Caldwell, and their 6-year-old daughter, Layla. A black family, well-dressed, well-mannered, flying first class on an AirLuxe Airlines flight. Yet the moment they set foot in the cabin, they weren't seen as passengers. They were seen as outsiders. What started as cold stares and subtle dismissals quickly spiraled into something far worse. A power-hungry flight attendant, Madeline Spence, saw an opportunity not just to make them uncomfortable, but to break them completely. With the help of her smug, equally cruel colleague, Owen, she weaponized every ounce of authority she had, stripping the Caldwell family of their dignity, turning the entire first-class cabin into an arena of silent complicity. Seats were reassigned. Lies were fabricated. Their child was taken. Their father was forced off the plane. Their mother was humiliated in front of everyone. And just when it seemed like they had lost everything, justice struck back. But the question is, how much power does someone like Madeline Spence really have? And when she crosses the wrong person, how far will she fall? This isn't just a story about a flight gone wrong. This is a story about arrogance, abuse of power, and the devastating consequences of unchecked discrimination. This is about a system that allows people like Madeline to thrive, until the day they pick the wrong target. Do you think people like Madeline exist in real life? Have you ever witnessed discrimination like this? Comment below and share your thoughts. If you believe justice should always win, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that expose the truth. And tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. Now let's dive into the story. This is the Caldwell family versus Madeline Spence. And trust us, you won't believe how it ends. Xavier Caldwell adjusted the strap of his carry-on bag as he stepped into the first-class cabin, his wife Monica close behind, holding their 6-year-old daughter Layla's hand. The air inside was crisp, scented with the subtle aroma of leather seats and expensive cologne. The overhead lighting cast a soft glow over the plush interior, creating an atmosphere of exclusivity. But despite the luxurious surroundings, a chill ran down Xavier's spine the moment he locked eyes with the flight attendant stationed near the entrance. Madeline Spence, the lead flight attendant, greeted the passengers with the polished smile of someone who had done this job for years. But as soon as she saw the Caldwells, that smile faltered just for a fraction of a second. Her gaze flickered to Owen, another flight attendant standing nearby, and without a word, they exchanged a quick, knowing glance. A subtle arch of the brow, a slight twitch of the lips, silent yet loud enough. Monica felt it immediately. The shift in tone, the stiffness in Madeline's posture. Her grip on Layla's tiny fingers tightened instinctively. She'd been through this before. The unspoken question in Madeline's scrutinizing gaze was always the same. Do you belong here? Xavier gave a polite nod, trying to ignore the weight of the stares pressing against his back as he guided his family toward their seats. As they moved down the aisle, Monica observed the contrast in service firsthand. A well-dressed white couple ahead of them handed their coats to a younger flight attendant, who accepted them with a cheerful, "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Langley. Let me take that for you." A warm, effortless exchange. When Monica turned to Madeline and gestured toward their coats, the woman's expression barely shifted. "Coat storage is available above your seats," she said flatly, pointing upward before turning away. No offer to help. No attempt at hospitality. Xavier exhaled slowly, already sensing where this was headed. He gently placed their coats in the overhead bin while Monica helped Layla into her seat by the window. The little girl's bright eyes scanned the cabin curiously, seemingly unaware of the tension creeping into the space around her parents. Across the aisle, an older man with silver hair and a tailored navy blazer took a long look at the Caldwells before shaking his head with an exasperated sigh. His voice, though low, carried enough weight to be heard. "Unbelievable," he muttered to no one in particular. Layla turned her head toward him. "Mommy," she whispered, tugging at Monica's sleeve. Are we not supposed to be here? Monica forced a smile and smoothed a hand over her daughter's soft curls. Of course we are, baby. Her voice was gentle, but inside she burned. Xavier clenched his jaw, but said nothing. The urge to respond, to push back, coiled inside him like a loaded spring. But he knew better. He'd learned long ago that even the slightest misstep, a sharp word, a defensive tone, could be twisted, weaponized. Aggressive, difficult, unruly. Labels that had been placed on black men for centuries. Monica, however, could not ignore the heat rising in her chest. As she reached for the flight attendant call button, Owen appeared beside them. "Can I help you with something?" His voice was polite, but his tone carried the same clipped edge as Madeline's. "Yes," Monica said. "We'd like some assistance finding space for our bags." Owen barely concealed his smirk. "You can try the compartments toward the back of first class. Or, if necessary, we can check them for you." Monica's fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. "We paid for first class," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Shouldn't we have access to the same accommodations as everyone else?" Owen's lips twitched, as if holding back amusement. "I'm just saying luggage space is first come, first served." Monica inhaled sharply, but before she could respond, Xavier placed a steady hand on her wrist. "Not now," his grip seemed to say. "Not yet." She swallowed her frustration as Owen walked away, leaving them to fend for themselves. The cabin continued to fill with passengers, the quiet hum of conversation blending with the occasional clink of champagne glasses. But to Monica, the noise felt distant, muffled. Her focus was locked on Layla, whose small hands now rested in her lap. Her excitement dimmed. Madeline passed by again, her gaze flickering toward them briefly before moving on. Xavier watched her closely, his mind already mapping out the path this flight was taking. This wasn't an accident, a silent, calculated effort to remind them of their place. The plane hummed softly as it prepared for takeoff, but for the Caldwells, the atmosphere inside the cabin grew heavier by the second. Xavier sat stiffly, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Monica kept a protective arm around Layla, who nestled closer to her mother's side, the brightness in her eyes dimmed by the tension thickening around them. They had barely settled in when Madeline returned, her presence looming over them like an approaching storm. She held a tablet in her manicured hands, scanning through passenger details with exaggerated precision before her lips curved into an insincere smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, I'm afraid there's been a small oversight." She tilted her head slightly, feigning regret. "Per airline policy, young children must be seated closer to the flight attendants for safety reasons." Monica's stomach twisted. "Excuse me." Madeline barely glanced at her, focusing on Layla instead. "Don't worry, sweetheart. You'll have a very special seat right near me. Won't that be fun?" Layla's little fingers curled tightly into Monica's dress. "I want to stay with Mommy." Madeline let out a small, patronizing laugh. "Oh, honey, your mommy will still be here, just a few seats away. It's only for a little while." Monica's grip on Layla tightened. "That's ridiculous. We purchase seats together. My daughter stays with us." Madeline's smile remained, but the sharpness in her gaze betrayed her irritation. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm sure you understand that we have safety protocols in place for a reason. It's for her own good." Before Monica could protest further, Owen suddenly appeared at her side. "If you'd like," he said, voice smooth but firm, "we can have a security officer come and explain it to you." Xavier's hands curled into fists. He could feel his pulse hammering in his ears. He had been patient. He had restrained himself. But now they were threatening to take his daughter away under the guise of protocol. His entire body coiled with rage, yet he knew that a single wrong move would be all they needed to paint him as the aggressor. Monica looked at him, silently pleading for reassurance, but he could offer none. Owen's gaze lingered on Xavier's clenched fists, the corners of his mouth twitching slightly in amusement. He had won this round, and he knew it. Monica turned back to Madeline, her voice shaking but controlled. "You are not taking my daughter." Madeline's expression remained neutral, but her fingers tapped impatiently against the tablet. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm not asking." Then, with eerie smoothness, another flight attendant, a younger woman with icy blue eyes, knelt beside Layla, her voice syrupy sweet. "Come on, honey. We don't want to make a big fuss, do we?" Layla whimpered, burying her face into Monica's side. And then, the final blow. Madeline exhaled dramatically, shaking her head in disappointment before turning to Layla directly. "Sweetheart, if you don't come with me, your mommy and daddy might get in trouble. You wouldn't want that, would you?" Monica froze. The words sliced through her like a blade. Layla lifted her head, eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Mommy." Madeline tilted her head. "If they don't listen to the rules, they might have to get off the plane. And then where would you go?" Layla hesitated. She turned to Monica, then Xavier, then back to the flight attendants, her small body trembling. And just like that, the fight was over. Monica felt her fingers go slack as Layla released her grip and allowed the blue-eyed flight attendant to take her by the hand. Her daughter, her baby, was led away without another word, her tiny shoulders stiff, her head bowed. Owen stepped aside as if nothing had happened, flashing a brief smirk at Xavier before following the other attendants to the front of the cabin. Madeline straightened, smoothing out her uniform. "See," she said lightly. "No trouble at all." She turned on her heel and walked away. Monica sat frozen, her arms empty, her body cold. Across the aisle, a blonde woman in pearl earrings sighed dramatically and shook her head. "Parents like that," she muttered to her husband. "Always making a scene." Xavier wanted to smash something, wanted to grab Madeline, Owen, anyone, and make them fix this. But what could he do? He was trapped in a space where every single move he made could be used against him. The realization sat in his gut like a lead weight. Monica's breath came in uneven, shallow gasps. She dug her nails into her thighs, trying to steady herself, but the anguish clawing at her chest made it impossible. From across the aisle, Owen met Xavier's gaze one last time and winked. And Xavier Caldwell, a man who had spent his entire life fighting to be respected, to be seen, had never felt more powerless. Monica sat frozen, her arms empty, her body still trembling from the moment they had taken Layla. The seat beside her felt colder, an unbearable emptiness creeping in where her daughter had been. Across the aisle, Xavier sat rigid, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white, his body radiating fury that had no outlet. Every muscle in his body screamed for action, but the weight of consequence pressed against him like an immovable force. If he so much as raised his voice, they would have him escorted off the plane. And then what? Layla would be alone. Monica left to fend for herself against these people who saw them as nothing more than an inconvenience. He had never felt more trapped. Madeline strolled back into view, her polished heels clicking softly against the floor, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction as she stopped beside Monica's seat, tilting her head as if observing something pitiful. "Oh dear," she mused, her voice dripping with mock concern. "You look absolutely devastated." "It's just a small adjustment, Mrs. Caldwell. No need for all the dramatics." Monica lifted her head slowly, her cheeks streaked with silent tears. "Give me back my daughter," she whispered, her voice hoarse, raw and nearly broken. Madeline let out a laugh, light and airy, as though Monica had just told the funniest joke in the world. "Give me back my daughter," she mimicked in an exaggerated whimper. "My goodness, listen to yourself. You sound like a desperate woman. That's not a good look in first class." A few chuckles rippled through the cabin. Monica flinched as if struck, her breath catching in her throat, her nails digging into her palms as humiliation burned through her skin. Xavier shifted beside her, his fingers twitching as if barely holding himself back, but before he could say anything, Owen leaned down, his voice low and venomous. "Careful now," he murmured, his breath just inches from Xavier's ear. "You wouldn't want to make a scene." Imagine Layla looking back and seeing her father dragged off a plane in handcuffs. That would be quite the memory for her, wouldn't it? Xavier's breathing turned ragged, his chest rising and falling unevenly as Owen pulled away with a smug smile, standing tall like a predator who knew its prey was already trapped. Across the aisle, a well-dressed woman with diamond earrings shook her head disapprovingly. Honestly, if they can't follow the rules, maybe they should have just booked economy. Her husband gave a quiet chuckle, returning to his glass of champagne as if the spectacle unfolding beside him was nothing more than entertainment. Monica turned away, her vision blurred, her entire body trembling. She had spent her life maintaining composure, had swallowed indignities too many times to count. But this was something else. This was the slow, calculated dismantling of her dignity in front of an audience that was relishing every moment. She bit down on her lip so hard she tasted blood, forcing back a sob that threatened to escape. Madeline sighed dramatically, feigning boredom as she checked her watch. "You're wasting everyone's time, Mrs. Caldwell. Honestly, I don't see why you're making such a fuss. Your daughter is perfectly fine. She's actually being quite well behaved, which is more than I can say for her parents." More laughter rippled through the cabin, muted but unmistakable. Monica squeezed her eyes shut, every cruel word carving deeper into her soul. Xavier, unable to bear it, reached for her hand, gripping it tightly, grounding her in a moment where everything felt like it was crumbling. Madeline's gaze flickered to their hands, and she smirked. "Oh, how touching," she said with faux sympathy. "You two really are making this flight memorable." Monica inhaled sharply, trying to summon any semblance of strength left within her. "You don't have the right to do this," she forced out, her voice barely above a whisper. Madeline arched an eyebrow, looking genuinely amused. "Don't I?" She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "See, Mrs. Caldwell, the thing is, I do have the right. I make the rules here. And do you know why? Because no one is stopping me." She let the words linger, let the truth of them sink deep into Monica's chest. No one was stopping her. No one was coming to their defense. The entire cabin sat in silent complicity, their discomfort overridden by privilege, by the convenience of looking away. Monica let out a shaky breath, her body slumping slightly, the fight draining from her like air escaping a punctured lung. That was what Madeline wanted. She wanted submission. She wanted Monica to break. And with every second that passed, she was getting closer to achieving it. Owen smirked, shifting his weight slightly as he leaned against the seat in front of them. "Tell me something, Mr. Caldwell," he mused. "How does it feel, sitting there so powerless?" Xavier's fingers twitched again, but he forced himself to stay still, his pulse roaring in his ears. He wanted to lash out, to reclaim some fragment of control, but every rational part of him screamed that he couldn't. He had to endure it. He had no choice. Monica dropped her gaze, blinking rapidly as fresh tears welled in her eyes. Madeline clapped her hands once, satisfaction radiating from her like a victorious queen surveying a conquered kingdom. "Well," she said brightly, "I think we've all learned a valuable lesson here today, haven't we?" Then, just as effortlessly as she had dismantled them, she turned and walked away, leaving them hollowed out and utterly broken in her wake. Monica sat motionless, her hands clenched in her lap, her body still trembling from the cruel laughter echoing around her. She had spent her entire life maintaining dignity, swallowing countless microaggressions, forcing herself to be the bigger person in every confrontation. But this was beyond anything she had ever experienced. This was a deliberate, calculated attempt to erase her, to reduce her to nothing more than a pitiful spectacle for the privileged passengers around her. Across the aisle, Xavier's silence burned. He was a man used to controlling the narrative, used to being respected, but here, in this sterile, oppressive space, he was nothing. He was just another powerless black man, sitting in stunned silence as his wife and child were torn apart in front of him. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane prepared for takeoff, but the atmosphere inside was anything but calm. Madeline reappeared, her presence as suffocating as ever, her predatory smile barely concealed. "Oh, Mrs. Caldwell, I must say you're quite the dramatic one," she mused, her voice dripping with false amusement. "I mean, it's not like we've taken your daughter away forever. She's perfectly fine. In fact," she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to make Monica's blood run cold. She's actually better off without you two hovering over her like desperate parents who don't know how to let go. Monica's breath caught, her nails digging into her palms so hard they nearly broke skin. A few rows ahead, Layla sat stiffly in her new seat, her small body nearly swallowed by the oversized first-class chair. A flight attendant, a woman with cold blue eyes, leaned down beside her, her voice smooth and deceivingly gentle. "You see, Layla, this is much better, isn't it?" she cooed. "Look how much space you have. You're not crammed between your parents anymore. This way, you can stretch out and relax like a big girl." Layla fidgeted, her hands tightening around the armrests, her wide eyes flickering between the unfamiliar woman and the empty space where her mother and father should have been. "But I want to sit with Mommy," she whispered hesitantly. The flight attendant's expression barely shifted, but her voice became just a fraction sharper. "Oh, sweetie, don't be difficult. Your parents are making things much harder than they need to be. If they had just listened, you wouldn't have to be here all alone, would you?" Layla hesitated, confusion clouding her young face. The woman smiled again, pressing a hand lightly to her shoulder. "You're not a bad girl, are you, Layla? You wouldn't want to be like them, would you?" Layla swallowed hard, her tiny fingers gripping the seat as the weight of the words settled over her. Back in her seat, Monica felt the shift before she even saw it. Layla wasn't fighting anymore. She wasn't calling out. She wasn't crying. She was accepting it. The realization hit Monica like a sledgehammer to the chest. They weren't just separating them physically. They were rewiring Layla's mind, making her believe that she and Xavier were the problem, that their love and protection were burdens. Madeline tilted her head, watching Monica with that same wicked amusement. "You know, Mrs. Caldwell, if you truly want her back, you might want to show a little humility." The words were light, almost casual, but the intent behind them was razor-sharp. Monica barely registered her own voice as she croaked out, "What do you mean?" Madeline's smirk deepened. "Oh, it's simple," she said airily. "I'll consider letting Layla return to her seat if you show me you really want it." Monica's stomach twisted violently. "What?" she whispered. Madeline sighed dramatically, as if exhausted by Monica's slowness. "It's quite simple, really. Get on your knees and apologize for causing so much trouble. Maybe, I'll let her come back." Xavier inhaled sharply beside her, his body jerking forward as if to intervene, but Owen was there in an instant, a single hand on his shoulder like a steel restraint. "Don't," Owen murmured, voice laced with warning. "You really don't want to push this any further." Monica felt the blood drain from her face. She turned slightly, looking toward Layla, who sat still, her head down, her small hands folded in her lap as the flight attendant continued whispering things Monica couldn't hear. Her baby, her innocent, sweet Layla, was slipping away from her, being molded into something else, something that fit into their world. If she let this continue, what would Layla believe when she stepped off this plane? Would she look at her parents with the same shame these people were forcing onto them? Would she believe she was better off without them? The thought made Monica's stomach churn violently. Her hands trembled as she pushed herself up, her knees threatening to buckle. She had never begged for anything in her life. She had fought for every inch of respect, every scrap of dignity. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This wasn't about her. This was about her daughter. Slowly, painfully, she lowered herself to the ground. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Xavier's breath hitched, raw disbelief and agony written across his face. "Monica, don't," he said hoarsely, but Madeline's delighted giggle drowned him out. "Oh, now this is a sight," Madeline purred, crossing her arms as she loomed over Monica's kneeling form. "Go on, Mrs. Caldwell. Tell me how sorry you are." Monica's vision blurred, tears burning her eyes, but she forced herself to speak. I'm sorry," she whispered, each syllable like shattered glass against her throat. Madeline cupped a hand around her ear, grinning. "I'm sorry what? I couldn't quite hear that." Monica's fists clenched against the carpeted floor. "I'm sorry," she said, louder this time, the words slicing through her like a blade. Madeline exhaled in mock satisfaction. "See? That wasn't so hard, was it?" She tapped a finger against her chin, pretending to consider. I suppose I could let Layla go back now. But oh, wouldn't it be fun to keep her a little longer? She's doing so well without you." Monica remained kneeling, her body still trembling from the humiliation Madeline had just inflicted upon her. She could feel the weight of every single gaze in that cabin pressing down on her like a lead blanket. The eyes of the privileged, watching with mild amusement or detached indifference. The whispers laced with quiet satisfaction. The occasional snicker from someone who had decided that this was nothing more than entertainment. Xavier's breath was ragged beside her, his fingers curled into fists so tight his knuckles were white. The pure rage in his eyes was like a storm about to break, but the leash around his neck was too tight, the chains of consequence too unyielding. If he moved, if he reacted, it would all be over. And then Madeline struck again. She exhaled with exaggerated disappointment, crossing her arms as she looked down at Monica, who was still on her knees. "You know, Mrs. Caldwell, I really thought you'd have a little more self-respect." Her voice was smooth, condescending, filled with the artificial warmth of someone who enjoyed toying with their prey. "But I suppose desperation makes people do all sorts of pathetic things." She let the words hang in the air, savoring the pain flashing in Monica's expression, before finally turning to Xavier. "And as for you, Mr. Caldwell, I'm afraid we have a small issue with your reservation." Xavier's gaze snapped toward her, his entire body coiled with barely contained fury. "What?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was no mistaking the warning beneath it. Madeline didn't flinch. If anything, her smirk deepened. "There seems to be a discrepancy with your booking. Something about an identity verification issue. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, but unfortunately, we need you to step off the aircraft and confirm a few details before we can proceed." Xavier's entire body tensed. His breathing was shallow, calculated, his mind working at rapid speed to decipher the trap being laid before him. "That's ridiculous," he said through clenched teeth. "I checked in like everyone else. My documents were verified at the gate." Madeline gave a small shrug, the perfect picture of feigned sympathy. "I don't make the rules, Mr. Caldwell. But unless you'd like us to escalate the matter, I'd suggest you comply." Monica's breath hitched. She reached for Xavier's arm instinctively, her nails digging into the fabric of his sleeve, panic rising in her chest like wildfire. If he stepped off that plane, she knew they would never let him back on. Xavier looked at her then, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that sent a fresh wave of terror through her. He knew it too, but he also knew that resisting would only make it worse. He inhaled sharply, his nostrils flaring, before he stood slowly, his entire frame taut with tension. Owen appeared at his side before he could say another word, his expression entirely void of emotion, his presence an unspoken threat. "This way, sir." His tone was level, impersonal, but Xavier could hear the satisfaction hiding beneath it. He turned back to Monica, his jaw clenched, his voice low. "Stay with Layla." Monica's throat burned, a strangled sound barely escaping her lips, as she fought against the panic constricting her chest. "Xavier, don't." Her voice cracked, but he gave her a single look, steady, unshakable, full of unspoken meaning. "I have to do this." Monica's fingers tightened, her breathing uneven, but before she could say anything else, Owen placed a hand on Xavier's shoulder, guiding him toward the exit. Xavier didn't fight it. He didn't resist. He simply walked, each step heavy, slow, deliberate. The entire cabin was silent now, watching with quiet fascination, as the powerful black man who had dared to sit in first class was escorted off the plane under a manufactured pretense. Monica tried to move, tried to follow, but the moment she stood, Madeline's fingers wrapped around her wrist, tight, cold, possessive. "I wouldn't," Madeline murmured, her lips barely moving, her nails digging into Monica's skin like claws. "You don't want to cause another scene, do you?" Monica's body went rigid, her breath catching in her throat. Her gaze flickered between Madeline and the shrinking silhouette of her husband disappearing through the exit. And for the first time since stepping onto this plane, true, unfiltered terror gripped her. A few rows ahead, Layla twisted in her seat, her small head tilting as she tried to see past the shoulders of the adults around her. "Daddy." Her tiny voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through Monica like a blade. Layla tried to shift, to move toward the aisle, but the blonde flight attendant beside her reached out smoothly, pressing a firm hand to the little girl's shoulder. "Stay still, sweetheart," she cooed. "Your parents are being very difficult right now. But don't worry, we'll take good care of you." Monica's heart stopped beating. She yanked her arm free from Madeline's grip, her entire body surging forward before she could think, her only instinct to get to her daughter before they could twist her mind even further. But the moment she moved, another set of hands caught her, strong, unrelenting, pulling her back into her seat with force that knocked the breath from her lungs. Owen stood over her now, his grip bruising, his expression unreadable. "I said," he murmured, his tone dangerously calm, "stay in your seat." Layla's head snapped toward the sound of her mother's struggle, her blue eyes widening in alarm. "Mommy," she whimpered, her voice barely audible. The flight attendant beside her gave a tight-lipped smile and gently turned Layla's face away, forcing her to look forward, away from the chaos, away from the mother who was breaking apart right behind her. "Don't worry, sweetheart," the woman whispered. "Your mommy is just a little overwhelmed. She'll calm down soon." Monica collapsed back into her seat, her chest rising and falling in sharp, painful bursts, tears streaming freely down her face. Xavier was gone. Layla was being manipulated right in front of her. She was completely alone. And Madeline, victorious, untouchable, merciless Madeline, simply adjusted her uniform, smoothed down her skirt, and let out a small, pleased sigh. "Much better," she murmured. Across the aisle, the space where Xavier had been just moments ago was empty, a cruel reminder that they had succeeded in removing him from the equation entirely. He was gone, banished, erased from this flight as if he had never belonged in the first place. Her mind screamed at her to fight, to stand up, to do something, anything, but her body refused to move. The weight of Madeline's control had settled over her like an iron shroud, suffocating, inescapable. Beyond her line of sight, Xavier stood at the gate, his heart hammering against his ribcage as he stared at the glass doors separating him from the plane. His fists were still curled, his entire body rigid with fury. He had argued, demanded to be let back on board, but the security officers had barely looked at him before shaking their heads, their expressions blank, their decisions final. "Sir, you are not permitted to reboard the aircraft." That single sentence had shattered everything. He knew what this meant. He knew this was not a temporary setback. This was permanent. The doors were closing, and he was being left behind. Layla was still inside. Monica was still inside, and he was utterly powerless to reach them. He slammed a fist against the barrier, his breath ragged, but no one reacted. No one cared. He was nothing to them. Inside the plane, Monica squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to wake up from this nightmare, but the moment she opened them, reality crashed down on her with brutal force. Layla sat ahead, her tiny body still and quiet, her head slightly turned as if she could sense her mother's despair but was too afraid to look. The blonde flight attendant had remained at her side, a hand resting lightly on the little girl's shoulder, fingers pressing just a little too firmly. Layla didn't move. She didn't struggle. The fight had already been drained from her, the conditioning already taking root. Monica's stomach twisted violently. They were winning. They had taken Xavier, they had broken her, and now they were reshaping Layla into something unrecognizable. Madeline returned, her polished heels clicking against the floor as she stopped beside Monica's seat, tilting her head with exaggerated pity. "Oh dear," she murmured, her voice dripping with amusement. "You look terrible. You should really take a moment to compose yourself. You wouldn't want to make the rest of the flight uncomfortable, would you?" Monica's body remained rigid, her breathing shallow. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Madeline clicked her tongue, pretending to be disappointed. "It's such a shame," she mused, crossing her arms as she gazed down at Monica, like she was nothing more than an insignificant pest. "You had a chance to make this easy. If you had just followed instructions from the beginning, none of this would have happened. But no, you had to be difficult." A choked sound escaped Monica's lips, but she quickly swallowed it down. She would not cry again. She refused to give Madeline that satisfaction. Madeline smiled, sensing the last remnants of resistance slipping away. "You see, Mrs. Caldwell, this is why people like you always struggle. You think the world owes you something. You think rules don't apply to you. But in the end, no matter how much you fight, you always end up right where you belong." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a whisper, ensuring no one else could hear what she said next. "On your knees, beneath people like me." Monica's breath hitched, her chest tightening so painfully that she thought she might be sick. Every cell in her body screamed at her to fight, to push back, to prove Madeline wrong. But what was left? What could she possibly do? They had already taken everything. A small sniffle broke through the heavy silence, and Monica's head snapped toward the sound. Layla, her daughter, sat perfectly still, her little shoulders trembling, her small hands gripping the armrests so tightly that her knuckles were white. Her head was still turned slightly toward her mother, but her eyes were wide, filled with unshed tears. She had heard everything. She had seen everything. And worst of all, she was accepting it. Monica's heart shattered. She had failed. The realization crashed into her with an unbearable weight, stealing the breath from her lungs, crushing the last fragments of hope she had been clinging to. It wasn't just about Xavier being gone. It wasn't just about Madeline's cruelty. It was the look in her daughter's eyes, the silent understanding that had settled over her tiny frame. They had won. They had taken a 6-year-old child and taught her that her parents were weak, that resistance was futile, that obedience was survival. Madeline straightened, adjusting her uniform with a satisfied smirk. "Now, be a good little passenger and keep quiet for the rest of the flight, won't you?" She turned without another word, strolling down the aisle as if she hadn't just destroyed a family, as if she hadn't just ensured that Layla Caldwell would never look at her parents the same way again. Madeline's world had already begun to crumble the moment that announcement echoed through the plane. But as she stood frozen, trying to process the abrupt shift in control, she knew something far worse was coming. Passengers murmured in confusion, some turning to their neighbors, others whispering among themselves, sensing that this was no ordinary delay. Monica, still gripping the armrest of her seat with white-knuckled intensity, felt the first flicker of something she hadn't dared to believe in since the nightmare began. Hope. Layla, her small body curled against her mother's side, lifted her head slightly, sensing that something had changed, that the crushing weight pressing down on them was finally shifting. But it was Madeline who felt the impact the hardest. Her stomach churned, her throat went dry, and for the first time since this flight began, she felt fear. Owen's normally smug expression faltered as he pressed a hand to his earpiece, his brows furrowing as he listened to the frantic chatter coming through his headset. "Something's wrong," he muttered under his breath, casting Madeline a sharp glance. But she barely heard him over the pounding in her own ears. Then the cockpit door opened. Lauren Caldwell stepped into the cabin, and the world as Madeline knew it shattered. Tall, poised, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that screamed authority, Lauren exuded a presence that commanded absolute power. Her expression was unreadable, her dark eyes scanning the cabin with a cool detachment that sent ice through Madeline's veins. The whispers among the passengers died instantly. Every single person in that first-class cabin, whether they knew who she was or not, felt the weight of her presence. But Madeline knew exactly who she was. CEO of AirLuxe Airlines. A woman whose name carried more power than any uniform Madeline had ever worn. A woman who owned the very system Madeline had believed she controlled. A woman who was looking at her like she was already done. Lauren's heels clicked softly against the floor as she approached, stopping just inches from where Madeline stood. The silence was suffocating. Every breath, every movement, every heartbeat in the cabin hinged on what was about to happen next. Lauren's voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. "Would you like to explain to me why my brother was forcibly removed from my company's flight? Why my sister-in-law was humiliated in front of an entire cabin? Why my 6-year-old niece was separated from her parents and used as a pawn in some twisted display of power?" Madeline staggered. The words slammed into her, but it was the way Lauren said them, with absolute cold-blooded authority, that made the reality of the situation sink in. Her brother, Xavier Caldwell, wasn't just some passenger. He was Lauren Caldwell's brother. Madeline opened her mouth, scrambling for a response, something, anything that could save her. But her voice betrayed her. "Miss Caldwell, there was a misunderstanding. I was only following procedure. I don't care." The words came sharp, final, and absolute. Lauren didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The sheer weight of her authority crushed any further words from Madeline's throat before they could even escape. Something shifted in the air. Power had changed hands. Lauren exhaled softly, tilting her head slightly, as if she were studying something insignificant. Then, without another word, she pulled out her phone, pressed a single button, and spoke with cutthroat efficiency. "I want her suspended immediately. Effective this second." The words rang through the cabin like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. Madeline choked on a breath, her chest tightening with pure, unfiltered panic. "Wait, Miss Caldwell, please. I was just trying to." Lauren didn't even look at her. "Security," she said into her phone, utterly unfazed, completely disinterested in whatever Madeline had to say. "Escort her off my plane." There was only Lauren, and there was only judgment. The words had been spoken, the verdict had been delivered, and yet some deep-rooted arrogance still clung to Madeline's bones, refusing to accept what was happening. She inhaled sharply, forcing steel into her voice as she took a single step forward. "Ms. Caldwell, I believe there's been a misinterpretation of events. If I could just have a moment to—" "I don't care," Lauren interrupted, her voice calm but laced with ice. The finality of it struck Madeline like a slap. She faltered, her fingers twitching at her sides, her mind scrambling for some foothold, some way to reverse the inevitable. She had wielded power so effortlessly mere minutes ago, had bent an entire family to her will, had made a grown woman kneel at her feet, had taken pleasure in stripping them of their dignity, and now her own was being torn from her in an instant. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one stepped in to defend her. Not Owen, not the other flight attendants, not the passengers who had once shared in her mockery. They all watched in stunned silence, some in horror, some in satisfaction, but none in support. She was alone. Lauren reached into her pocket, retrieving her phone with slow, deliberate movements, her eyes never leaving Madeline's. "Madeline Spence," she said, her tone so steady it was terrifying. "Effective immediately. You are relieved of your duties as lead flight attendant of this aircraft." Madeline's heart stopped. "No," she breathed, barely above a whisper. Her fingers curled, her nails digging into her palms, panic rising in a way she had never known before. "Miss Caldwell, please. I said I don't care." Lauren's voice remained cold, devoid of any emotion. She pressed a single button on her phone, lifting it to her ear. "Security, escort her off my plane." The words ripped the air apart. The quiet that followed was crushing. Madeline barely had time to react before two uniformed security officers stepped forward, their expressions unreadable, their movements precise. One reached for the name tag clipped neatly to her blazer and ripped it away, the soft tear of fabric sounding like a death sentence. She gasped, stumbling back, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. "Wait," she choked out, her voice cracking, her carefully constructed persona fracturing beyond repair. "This is a mistake. I was just enforcing policy." They were. Lauren took a single step closer, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion touched her otherwise icy features. "Disgust. Get off my plane." The words hit Madeline harder than any slap, any shove, any humiliation she had ever inflicted on someone else. The security officers seized her arms, their grips firm but not cruel, offering no room for resistance. The control she had held over this flight, over its passengers, over the Caldwell family, had been absolute. But now, in mere minutes, it had been stripped away so cleanly, so effortlessly, that it almost felt like she had never had it at all. Her body jerked involuntarily as she was pulled toward the exit, her heels dragging against the carpet. The whispers began to rise around her, quiet at first, then growing, spreading, amplifying, until she was drowning in them. "She deserves it. Did you see how she treated them? Good riddance." Someone laughed. Someone clapped. The same passengers who had once ignored the cruelty, who had once indulged in it, who had once been silent participants, now turned on her without hesitation. Madeline's breath came in short, sharp bursts, her vision tunneling as she was pulled closer to the open door, to the abyss waiting beyond it. Layla turned in her seat, her small hands gripping the armrest, her big, innocent eyes locking onto the woman who had torn her from her parents. Moments ago, she had ruled over that flight like a queen, dictating every humiliation, every ounce of suffering, every cruel separation that had crushed the Caldwell family beneath her authority. Yet now, she was the one being forcibly removed, stripped of control, discarded like a piece of trash unworthy of the system she once dominated. The security officers flanking her didn't acknowledge her sputtered protests, their expressions void of sympathy, treating her not as a respected employee, but as a liability, an embarrassment, a mistake to be erased. Her heels clacked against the polished airport floors with every hurried step, but the once commanding sound now felt meaningless, empty, a hollow echo of power that no longer belonged to her. Eyes followed her from every direction, passengers whispering, some smirking, some recording the scene with their phones, capturing her downfall in real time, turning her disgrace into entertainment for the masses. Her thoughts spiraled, desperately clinging to the idea that this could be salvaged, that this was just a temporary setback, a misunderstanding that could be rectified if she just explained herself to the right person. But before she could latch onto that delusion, she was brought to an abrupt stop at the security checkpoint. A cold, detached voice spoke without looking up, the man behind the desk scanning her employee ID with no urgency, no regard for the way her entire life was unraveling in front of him. Madeline Spence, former lead flight attendant of AirLuxe Airlines. "You are no longer authorized to be on company property." Her stomach twisted violently, nausea creeping up her throat, her chest tightening as if the air had been sucked out of the terminal. The guard turned his screen toward her, and there it was. Her name, her profile, stamped in bold, unforgiving red letters. Terminated, permanently blacklisted. The words blurred in her vision, her pulse thundering in her ears, her fingers twitching at her sides as her mind refused to accept reality. "This is wrong," she choked out, barely recognizing her own voice, the hoarse, panicked edge to it. Her hands trembled as she reached for the desk, her nails digging into the hard surface, as if she could physically anchor herself to the last shreds of power she had left. I demand to speak to someone in corporate. There's been a mistake." The man barely spared her a glance, his indifference like a slap to the face, his fingers already moving over the keyboard to finalize her removal. "There's no mistake." The directive came from headquarters. His voice was calm, dismissive, as if he had repeated these words 100 times before, but never had they carried so much finality, so much absolute destruction. She shook her head violently, panic rising like a flood she couldn't escape. "No, you don't understand. I've been with this airline for 15 years. I have seniority you had." The past tense stung like acid. Her world tilted, her chest tightening with every fractured breath, her vision darkening at the edges as realization sank in with brutal force. She had lost her job. Not just this job, not just this flight, but her entire career. The airline industry was small, tightly connected, and a blacklisting from AirLuxe meant she would never be hired by another carrier again. Her once pristine reputation, her carefully cultivated image of power and excellence, had been reduced to nothing more than a stain, a warning, a cautionary tale. Her desperation shifted, clawing for another lifeline, and she latched onto the one thing she had left, her money. Her fingers fumbled for her phone, unlocking her banking app with shaking hands, searching for the comfort of financial security, the proof that she still had control over something. The screen loaded, and her heart stopped. Account status, frozen pending internal review. A choked gasp escaped her lips, a sound of pure, undiluted terror. "No," she whispered, her fingers frantically tapping, refreshing, willing the numbers to return, but the red text remained, mocking her. Her severance gone, her bonuses revoked, her pension under investigation. Everything she had worked for, every cent she had accumulated, had been ripped away in an instant, leaving her standing in the middle of the airport with nothing but the weight of her consequences crushing her into oblivion. A sharp, authoritative voice cut through her spiraling panic. Madeline Spence. She looked up, her blood running cold as a corporate representative approached, a sleek navy suit, a stack of legal documents in hand, the kind of presence that only accompanied irreversible decisions. "You have been formally served." The words barely registered before the stack of papers was placed into her trembling hands, her eyes scanning the top of the document, dread sinking its claws into her ribcage. Plaintiff, Xavier Caldwell, Monica Caldwell. A wave of nausea surged through her as she flipped through the pages, the reality of what she was holding slamming into her like a freight train. The Caldwell family had filed a lawsuit against her, charging her with racial discrimination, emotional distress, unlawful removal of a passenger, and multiple violations of airline policy. The pages blurred as her hands shook violently, her breath coming in short, panic gasps, her mind screaming for a way out that no longer existed. The corporate official continued in a tone void of sympathy. "You are required to appear for a legal deposition. Failure to comply will result in further legal action." The words landed like hammer blows, but Madeline could barely comprehend them through the deafening roar of her own downfall. Fired, blacklisted, financially erased, and now sued. Her body swayed unsteady as she stepped backward, her vision narrowing, her breath strangled in her throat. There was no escape. No one was coming to save her. There was no Owen to smirk beside her, no passengers to laugh at her cruelty, no power left to wield. Around her, the atmosphere of the plane had shifted completely. Gone was the toxic air of silent complicity. Gone were the smug smirks and entertained whispers, replaced by a thick, heavy silence, as passengers grappled with the realization that they had been spectators to something monstrous, something deeply wrong. Across the aisle, the seat that had once belonged to Madeline Spence sat empty, a stark, glaring reminder of the fall of a woman who had once seemed untouchable. The woman who had commanded this plane with absolute cruelty had been dragged away like a criminal, stripped of her title, her career, her power, and every ounce of the arrogance that had fueled her actions. The message had been made clear. There would be no protection for those who abused their authority. Lauren Caldwell stood at the front of the cabin, calm, composed, but burning with a quiet fury that had not yet faded. She addressed the passengers in a voice measured, steady, but unmistakably firm. "On behalf of AirLuxe Airlines, I want to extend my deepest apologies to Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell and their daughter for what they have endured today. This behavior was unacceptable, inexcusable, and will never happen again." Her gaze swept across the cabin, challenging, unforgiving, a silent demand that every single person in that space understand the gravity of what had transpired. "We will be conducting a full internal review to ensure that nothing like this is ever repeated, and those responsible for allowing this kind of discrimination to flourish within our ranks will be removed just as swiftly." Her words rang with finality, a warning to all who had stood by and done nothing. A moment of silence passed before something unexpected happened. A single, hesitant clap rang out from the back of the cabin, then another, until the entire first-class section was filled with thunderous applause, a mixture of guilt, relief, and the undeniable satisfaction of watching justice be served. Monica exhaled shakily, her hand finding Xavier's, her fingers tightening around his as he squeezed back, grounding her, reminding her that they had won. Across the aisle, Layla sat curled in her father's arms, her small frame trembling slightly, but her expression was no longer fearful. She had seen something cruel, something ugly, but she had also seen something powerful, something right. A flight attendant approached cautiously, but this time, her posture was different, her eyes filled with quiet remorse. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell," she said softly, her voice hesitant, careful. "We would like to move you and your daughter to the most comfortable seats we have, free of charge. We'd also like to offer our sincerest apologies for..." Xavier lifted a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. His voice was quiet but unwavering. "We're staying right here." The flight attendant nodded, not arguing, not pressing further. She simply bowed her head slightly and stepped away. Monica turned to Layla, brushing a gentle hand through her daughter's curls. "Are you okay, baby?" Layla nodded slowly, still processing everything, but her voice was stronger than before. "Mommy," she whispered, her small fingers reaching for Monica's hand. "You don't have to cry anymore." The words hit harder than anything else that night, a simple, innocent truth that carried so much weight. Monica let out a breath, one final, shuddering exhale, then kissed her daughter's forehead. "No, baby," she murmured. "I don't." Outside, Madeline stood in the middle of the terminal, her face ashen, her body frozen in place as the reality of her destruction settled into her bones. The whispers around her were different now, not ones of admiration, not ones of respect, but of recognition, of disgrace, of irreversible downfall. She reached for her phone with shaking hands, tried to call anyone, but no one answered. She had been erased. On board the plane, as the engines roared to life and the aircraft prepared to take flight, Xavier and Monica sat together, their family whole, their dignity intact, their nightmare finally over. They had been dragged through hell, but they had come out the other side, not broken, not defeated, but victorious. The last thing Monica saw before the plane lifted off the ground was the sight of Madeline standing alone, swallowed by the terminal, a shadow of the woman she had once been. Justice had been served, and the world would never forget it. The end. If you think justice was served, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories. What was the most shocking moment for you? Did Madeline deserve her fate, or do you think her punishment should have been even harsher? Let us know in the comments below. Also, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments so we can see where our amazing viewers are tuning in from.